Once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the July 14th, 2020 Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture Community Conversation. At this time, please ensure your microphone and video are muted to minimize distractions unless you are one of today's presenters or featured speakers. I have a question for all of you. What does agricultural biosecurity mean to you? If you would take a minute and type in the chat box what agricultural biosecurity means to you, whether it means nothing at all or it has some meaning to you. I'd like to know what that is. And we'll check back on that in a little bit. Today's conversation is designed to broaden our thinking about protecting health, from that of agricultural animals to plants to people. Whether applying biosecurity practices to protect animal health, or sanitation to protect plant health, or integrated pest management to protect plant, animal, or human health, we're all promoting or implementing human behaviors designed to protect health. Whether you think of this framework as One Health or One Biosecurity, we have organized this session today and one later this month to intentionally bring folks together to highlight commonalities in how we approach protecting health through practices and policies, particularly those relevant to agricultural biosecurity. So it looks like you have some thoughts on agricultural biosecurity, and we'll circle back later and see if your thoughts have changed over the course of our conversation today. We have two experts lined up to speak with us today, and we'll get started as soon as we take care of some introductions. First, a bit about myself and the project that led to these community conversations. I'm Dr. Julie Smith, Research Associate Professor at the University of Vermont. I've been engaged with preventative animal health programs, biosecurity education, and agricultural emergency preparedness since 2002. For the last 5 years, I've been the project director of a large multidisciplinary project studying the human behavioral components of agricultural biosecurity. In other words, what influences people to do the things they need to do to protect animal health and prevent the introduction of diseases into animal production systems or prevent spread within those facilities. With the community conversations, we want to take this question to the people who work with the people within systems and facilities and talk about how we can do a better job with communication and policies to promote health protection behaviors. If you want to find out more about the overall project activities and have an opportunity to listen to presentations given by project team members at the symposium last May, please visit https://agbiosecurityproject.org. And if we could have the acknowledgement slide, I'd like to recognize Deb Grantham, who's the director of the Northeastern Integrated Pest Management Center, who attended the project symposium and workshop last year and has been instrumental in setting up this month's community conversations. I'd like to give Deb a chance to introduce herself and the objectives for today's meeting.
Thanks, Julie. I'm really excited to be part of this discussion. I see the symposium that Julie hosted last spring was one of the most stimulating events I'd been to in many years. And I'm very excited today. I see great value in cross-disciplinary communication and action. Most of the terms that we use are different across disciplines, but the goals of managing pests and diseases of animals, plants, and humans, and the concepts in our approaches to those goals are very similar. I see a lot of crossover there, and I would like to ask the question, are there ways to cross that plant-animal divide that will inform all of our work? And I hope we'll be thinking about that during the next half hour or so, and at least start to get at that question in this discussion.
Great. Well, before we go further, once again, if you're not familiar with Zoom, if you have any questions about your view, or if you have any questions for us, go ahead and put them in the chat box at any time. And as we get started, so we've tried to give you a lay of the land, why we're here today. But I'm curious why you're here. What brought you here? What are you hoping to accomplish by joining today's conversation? If you would share your thoughts about why you joined in the chat box, I would love to see that. What do you hope to get out of being part of today's community conversation? We're glad to have you along for today's biosecurity community conversation. The community conversations focus on topics primarily related to protecting agricultural, animal, and plant health, which is related to the name of our website, Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture. We, of course, want to draw attention to the web-based resources we have on that website, but more importantly, we want to foster a community of sharing challenges and solutions through the community conversations and a forum through Connect Extension, which we will introduce in more detail toward the end of today's session. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our featured speakers. We have, as I mentioned, 2 featured speakers with us today, and we will be splitting the next 30 minutes between the 2 of them. We'll begin our conversation with a moderated conversation with the speakers and check for questions and comments in the chat box as we go. If you would rather speak, since we're a fairly small group, if you would rather speak your comment or question rather than type it in the chat box, just type hand in the chat box, and we will call on you when we have, when we get to the point where we can do that. So Deb, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and introduce our first guest, Betsy Lamb.
Sure. So Dr. Elizabeth Lamb, most of us know her as Betsy, is the Ornamentals IPM coordinator at the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program based at Cornell University. She also works at, with greenhouses on a broader scale, including vegetable producers. Betsy has a PhD in plant breeding from the University of Minnesota, an MS in veg crops from Cornell, and a BA in biology and botany from Smith College. She brings extensive experience in pest management in these settings, and it's been really interesting comparing ag biosecurity and plant sanitation with her over the last few days as we prepare for this. Betsy, thanks for being part of this conversation. So our format here is to, it's sort of panel style, so I'll ask Betsy a few questions and hopefully that'll stimulate some discussion. So Betsy, my first question for you is, what are some greenhouse or nursery terms or terminology that are equivalent to the term biosecurity in the animal industry?
Thanks, Deb. So it's very interesting because I consider myself a newbie coming into this. And when you first asked me and I said what I thought biosecurity was, it was like, no, that's not really what we're talking about. And so when I started thinking about it, because it's a term we don't use very much in plant production, clearly more often used in animal production. But I will say I went to the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website, and the terminology is really overall very similar. The concepts of prevention, detection, and responding to an issue would all resonate, I think we all resonate with plant producers. So we think a lot about sanitation. We think about isolating plants that you might bring into a greenhouse as a way of preventing spread to other plants. Greenhouses are a little bit different in that they are somewhat, not always completely, but somewhat cut off from the outside environment. So in some ways you may look at them as having less potential for moving things in, but I'm not sure that that's always true. And so, you know, scouting and knowing what might be coming, all of those things are listed on your website, and they're all terminology that makes sense. Traffic is one I would say we don't think about as much, but I think, again, your concept of saying, are there things we can share between the two production systems? When people start thinking about it, and I'm the same way, and I sort of said, oh, we don't do much in terms of, you know, seeing what's coming from somewhere else until I started thinking about it, and we do that. And so all the things that are listed there, I said most of the terminology is actually very similar. So I've learned a lot already. So you've already had your desired effect in terms of knowing what biosecurity is and how it might be presented to plant production personnel.
Thank you. So can you talk a little bit about some of the preventative or biosecurity measures in greenhouses?
I certainly can. So I started thinking about the concept of early warning and talking about it to other people, because I thought, well, we have the cucurbit and basal downy mildew. There are alert systems. We do get basal downy mildew in greenhouses, not so much cucurbit. Late blight is another one that has sort of an early warning system. Again, late blight in a greenhouse is not as common as it might be out in a field. It's not impossible. But then I started thinking about some of the other programs that I'm involved in. I don't know that growers necessarily are, but I link to the CAPS program from the state, which is the Cooperative Ag Pest Survey, and then also NAPO, which is the North American Plant Protection Organization, just to see what's out there and to know, yes, indeed, there's something like box moth in Ontario, which has a potential for our ornamental growers should it cross the border, and they don't really care what the borders are. So that seemed like something that was, again, it made me think about what I'm actually doing. Monitoring and scouting are essential, and I think knowing not only what could be coming in, but what's already there and where it is and how it got into your greenhouse, and then the possibility of how it might move through your greenhouse are essential. It's hard to say whether that's preventative or it's just part of the whole system of management of the pest. We do look at exclusion a little bit. Many of the greenhouses in New York State, the ornamental greenhouses, and for that matter, the vegetable greenhouses, are small. We have quite a range in operations, from very small sort of mom and pop family owned to large scale wholesale operations, both in vegetables and in ornamentals. And some of what they might do in these procedures are different. So in terms of the concept of traffic, as I said, was one that was interesting from the animal point of view, thinking about who's coming on your farm and where they've been before and what they might be bringing in. We range from operations that have their production greenhouse is also their retail greenhouse. So there's very little limitation of traffic, of other people in and out. On the larger scale, they may do more of that, where they know exactly who's in and who's allowed to be in, and there's much more control on traffic. We do the concept where we're always trying to convince people to do isolation. So many plants are produced from plant materials other than seeds. And when you bring those in, they have the potential to bring pests in with them. We would love people always to put them in an isolated area so that they're not just mixed in with all the other plant materials in the greenhouse. It's a hard sell in a small greenhouse because space is money. And so we get a little traction on it. I'm not sure we have enough. Certainly anything that qualifies as sanitation. So if you find a plant that is affected, as opposed to just carrying it out of the greenhouse the way it is, maybe you need to bag it or put it in a trash can with a lid. If you're pruning parts off and there's diseases or insects and they go in a trash can and you don't put a lid on them, there's been studies to see what comes back out of that trash can and will end up back on your plant. So anything that qualifies as sanitation, I think, comes in there. And then the concept just of increasing overall plant health. So what are you doing for plant nutrition and light and watering so that you have the healthiest plants to help increase tolerance? And then in ornamentals, not so much, in vegetables more, we do actually have genetic resistance so that you could choose varieties based on their ability to resist, and often diseases, not as often for insects. So those are a few of the things that we're doing that would be considered preventative measures that I think would come under the umbrella of biosecurity.
Well, and when Betsy and I were looking back and forth at the Healthy Agriculture website and talking, Betsy said, oh, well, we don't do mortality management. I said, oh, but you do. You just talked about that. You know, don't just carry the plant out. Put it in an enclosed container, trimmings go in an enclosed container. So, you know, there's another way that we say we don't do the same things, but in a way
we actually do.
In fact, we do.
I have a scout that I work with she is a private scout, but she sends pictures and so forth, and she always laughs about, she puts different colors tape up around plants that really should be thrown away. And getting a greenhouse operator sometimes to throw a plant away is very difficult. It's different if you have a dead animal, it's clearly a problem. They're always convinced that they can save it. And I told her, she said, so every day she goes, she puts a different color up. And I told her I was going to get crime scene tape to put up at a point where it's like, I've told you this 5 times, it really needs to go. But so yes, if we started calling it mortality management, maybe they would do it. And again, you're right, it's good. It's a potential spread from that plant to the other ones. It's just a hard sell sometimes.
We talked also quite a bit in our conversations about contamination coming into the greenhouse and contaminated plant material leaving the greenhouse to go to gardens and so on. And it doesn't sound like, I mean, plant material coming into the greenhouse to be grown, like cuttings or rooted cuttings, either one, and the soil that maybe is brought in or stockpiled, but that didn't sound as much of an issue as, say, a lot of traffic between livestock farms because of people delivering feed and moving animals around and so on. It didn't sound as if it's as big an issue with greenhouses as it would be with livestock. Perhaps.
Well, I think one of the things we were talking about is, you know, we don't see things like nutrition people or feed salesmen going from farm to farm to farm. That's less common in greenhouse production and maybe in plant protection across the way, across the whole range of it. And so I think we think less about that. I mean, and also, I mean, there may be some diseases that can be transmitted between animals and humans where that's not so true in plants. There are diseases, viruses in particular, that can be transmitted from people. For example, tobacco mosaic virus can be transmitted if you just smoke. So the concept of, you know, trying to encourage the people that are working in your operation to wash their hands before they go back into the greenhouse. There are some things that people will do sometimes to put pads with disinfectants in them to clean off people's feet for, could be diseases, could be weed seeds. Those have the potential to be very good, but you have to maintain them correctly, or because they also have the potential to actually encourage spread. So I think it's one of the issues that it's not that it's completely different between the two production systems, but it's less commonly thought of. And plant materials coming in is one of the sources of pests, primarily insect pests, but sometimes also diseases. Every once in a while, there are a few diseases that are considered federally controlled, and we will get information about those having come into some location, and then they have to do trace backs and trace forwards to find out where that material was, where did it come from, and where has it been shipped to. So that happens probably every spring. We get one. They're not too common, but they can become a big issue. Then we were also talking about, so which diseases do you tend to see going out the door? And I thought, oh, well, not so many, until I thought of Impatience downy mildew, which is one where the plants can be sold without seeing much of the downy mildew. They get out into the gardens, and we have the right environmental conditions, and all those plants just melted. One year where every Impatience in the state, I think, died. So it is possible to have it be going out the door as well.
So I made a convert of you.
You did. So you've been successful.
And but I want to maybe summarize a little bit about how biosecurity maps to integrated pest management in a plant situation. So I think there's a lot of the same steps that are taken and are called different things, and maybe some are more intense.
I think it's a very significant overlap there in that you're integrating methods of management. There's the record keeping and communication aspects. There's all the prevention aspects and management once you have them. So I think you could lay the one over the other and find out that most of the things that are involved in biosecurity also are involved in integrated pest management, in greenhouses or anywhere for that matter.
Thank you.
Could we take a question? Andrea wanted to raise a question.
Certainly.
Andrea, if you want to unmute, you can ask your question.
Great, thank you so much. I just have a sort of a more maybe global question. So I subscribe to a lot of ag listservs, and I've seen quite a few articles, largely for ag in the Midwest, about farmers not wanting seed salesmen and other visitors on their property, largely because of COVID. So I guess my question is sort of twofold. One is, number one, I think folks talked about that a little bit, which is salespeople and other sort of supportive staff people that may come to the farm. But the other question is, do you see the issue of COVID-19 impacting your program in this agricultural biosecurity, because it's both staff and farmer and also visitors?
Mm-hmm.
So I just was sort of curious about that. Thank you.
Certainly has. This year has been, I spent an amazing amount of time working with greenhouse growers, Christmas tree growers too, which we don't think about them so much. Their sales season isn't yet, but they have the same issues. Nursery growers, in terms of figuring out what are appropriate allowances for bringing people in, whether it's customers or whether it's salespeople, or for that matter, whether it's their staff, in terms of keeping the people healthy. Even though the production system itself, it does not really affect COVID. I always say these things, and then I know Deb will come up with an example where it really does. But so it's not the plants that are having anything to do with the COVID or not. Now, for New York State, greenhouses were considered, ornamental greenhouses were not considered essential at the beginning of all this. So you can imagine the issues that came up in terms of how do we keep a business going when we're not even allowed to have anybody more than one person come into our operation, and that person just to do maintenance, when you've got an operation that's too big for one person to do all the watering even.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is, I think like in all aspects of my life, certainly COVID has made me think about things differently. And I think it has made growers think about things differently. In New York State, every grower is required to create a safety plan that is available should any employee, any customer, any regulator, any state personnel come in, they can ask for that safety plan. And it has to go through all the aspects of keeping the people safe as they relate to that operation. So we may learn some things that we keep going with or without COVID, which is perhaps a good thing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. I just sort of had another sort of crazy thought, which is, for smaller scale farms, the practice of borrowing equipment is not beyond the realm of possibility. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but think sometimes like, oh, because everything is sort of, a just-in-time kind of approach. And I often think, Ike, what are they bringing in here? But I guess everyone's doing the best they can. But I sometimes think that if the literature advised producers to think a little bit about when they're borrowing things, especially large equipment that's actually going into the greenhouse or into the field, that they give a little bit of thought as to what else is on that equipment.
And besides COVID, there's weed seeds. That's
one
of the things we always think about. So, and even just within an operation, the concept of sharing equipment, we created these best management practices for ornamental producers and including landscaping operations. And one of the suggestions that I saw somewhere was put colored tape on all your equipment so everybody knows which one they're using. So they're not sharing it. And so you use your own, and then when you're done, you wipe it off, and then somebody else could use it. But at least you're not doing too much transfer of equipment from one person to the next. And it gets complicated when you have limited equipment and more people than you have equipment. But you're right. And then in some operations, they might actually share equipment from operation to operation, and that has potential as well. So just in our own program, we have, most of our research has been put on hold, but we have pollinator habitat that needs some maintenance. And so the woman that I work with who's actually doing it the process is amazing to, you know, rent the truck, pick up the truck, then wipe that all down, then go get the mower and wipe that all down, and then go out and mow, and then come back and wipe it all down and wipe the truck out and take it back. And again, in terms of time and what you can actually get done, it has an effect on all the production aspects. So health is a big one, but there's other pieces as well. So those are great questions. Thank you.
This is a great conversation, and I love how Betsy shared her thoughts on how what she does is what us animal people call biosecurity, that we do a lot of the same procedures. We just think about it a little differently in terms of the terminology. And I think we'll hear a little more about that as we turn to our next speaker. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Heather Fowler to our conversation. Dr. Fowler is the Director of Producer and Public Health with the National Pork Board. Some things she and I have in common are that we both grew up in New Jersey, and we both spent a lot of time in college before landing our current jobs. Dr. Fowler attained her veterinary degree, a VMD, from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in public health from the Yale School of Public Health, and a doctorate degree from the University of Washington in environmental and occupational health sciences. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Fowler.
Thanks for having me.
So, Dr. Fowler, your title is fairly unique in the industry, Director of Producer and Public Health. Mm-hmm. In helping us understand what you do, can you give us some examples of how your public health training has supported pork producers in keeping their herds healthy?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's really a two-way street. I'm learning from my training how to apply that work, but also learning from producers what they've done and how we can move forward in the future. So in complete transparency, I primarily focus on diseases. So zoonotic diseases spread between people and animals. I work on topics like zoonotic influenza, for instance, antimicrobial resistance. So I work with producers on those different issues and make sure that they're up to date on the most recent science and that they're taking the appropriate steps. So Betsy earlier mentioned hand washing and all these different activities that fold really well into biosecurity. And I have a colleague that looks at the flip side of that. So I focus on the human health side. She focuses on the swine health side. So it kind of a little bit falls into her wheelhouse, though we do overlap. So for the swine industry, biosecurity really is focused on preventing swine diseases, so preventing disease in the herd itself. And as Betsy mentioned, a lot of the different things that I was writing down, sanitation, we talk about disposal, prevention, detection, response, sharing equipment, that's a huge biosecurity no-no. And again, it's really focusing on preventing those pathogens from entering the farm and spreading throughout the farm. And so it's great to be part of this conversation. I wrote down in my notes, pigs and plants, and just hearing from the different aspects of agriculture and how we really are speaking the same language, though we might give it a different name.
Maybe I should have started with this question. I'm curious how you explain what biosecurity is to the general public.
Yeah, so I generally describe biosecurity as a set of practices that one implements to prevent entrance and spread of disease on the farm. And one of the ways we can show the public that, we have a number of virtual tours that we have available on our library, library.pork.org. We take folks in to our farms. We do live farm tours. Obviously now with COVID, we're really leaning on our virtual tours right now, but I think it's one thing to tell someone biosecurity, we talk about shower in, shower out. That's something that might be a little unique to the swine industry as it relates to biosecurity practices. So we completely disrobe, shower in, and put in farm-specific clothes. Nothing that goes in really comes out. And even if you take in a sack lunch, there are ways to handle the packaging to make sure that you're not bringing anything on there. And there's some places that don't even allow pork products into farm facilities. So again, when I talk to the public, I try to explain in the big picture. Now with COVID, you have that example of how when it first hit, we talked about bio-exclusion. So when I think of biosecurity, I think bio-exclusion, containment, and management. So we tried to prevent it from coming in through travel bans and things like that, not allowing from areas that had high incidence at the time to come into the United States. Then once we pretty much had it, we were on to biocontainment to preventing it from spread to different states, and then biomanagement within the different states with their different incidences. So unfortunately, it took a pandemic on the human health side to help better explain what we do with our farmers. But prior to that, we were doing a lot of outreach to the public through those virtual tours and in person. And let me tell you, bringing someone on the farm and having to provide clothing for them and having them shower into a facility, it really sticks then once they have that experience.
Dr. Fowler, I want to turn to a different topic, and it's one that maybe we can pick Betsy's brain about a bit too, but this need to use antimicrobials, to use products that kill specific pests, whether those are external pests or internal pests. And I know that you focus a bit on that because there are issues beyond, there's issues certainly for the people who are using these products, that they want these products to be useful and not to be developing resistance to what they're trying to be treating. But some of these issues, if they're particularly bacteria that can affect people, we're also concerned about the resistance to things that people might need to be treated against. So I'm curious, obviously, most of us, if we've had children, know that we can't expect kids to be healthy all the time. Sometimes we need to treat something with antibiotics. Presumably that's the same with any kind of animal production system. What is it that you focus on in working with pork producers? What do you have them keep in mind when they're making decisions about whether or not to treat and what to treat with?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And that's really rooted in our foundation of We Care ethical principles. We want to make sure our producers are using antibiotics responsibly. So we folded that into our flagship program, the PQA Plus, or Pork Quality Assurance Plus program. So anyone and everyone in the industry, if I have interns that work with me for 2 weeks to 6 weeks, even a day, I have them complete this program so that they understand the core practices and the good production practices within the industry. Now, as it relates to responsible antibiotic use, we educate producers on reducing the overall need for antibiotics. So making sure your herd health plan, you work with your veterinarian to update your herd health plan, you're monitoring the health of your animals. So obviously they're doing daily walkthroughs, checking feed and water, but also checking the health of these animals, communicating what they see up to the farm manager and the veterinarian, etc. If there is a need, so you have a disease incidence, we want to include that veterinarian in that process, make sure there's a VCPR or veterinarian client-patient relationship in place when using antibiotics. So we want to reduce the overall need again. Once we have to, we want to see if you really want to focus the use on as few animals as possible. So if you don't need to treat the barn, can you focus on one room, one pen, one individual animal? So we drive home a lot of these pillars of responsible use, and that's built into the PQA Plus training. And then we remind them the importance of proper disposal and recording of the treatments, etc. So we really try to make sure that, especially we think of someone new entering the industry, is trained in that program, and it covers those key principles and steps as it relates to responsible antibiotic use.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this question back to Betsy. Betsy, are there any thoughts that you can share on use of pesticides and antimicrobials in plant production that would be parallel to that?
We are largely speaking the same language, just slightly different in terms of, yep, what we want people to do is make sure that they have the issue before they put on a pesticide. People don't think about pesticides on ornamentals as much, which is both a good and bad thing sometimes. But if you're talking about food crops, of course, now we're talking about pesticides that have the potential to be consumed by humans also. And part of what's allowed to be used is determined by the EPA and the tests that go through the EPA. So they've got information on residues and health of humans as well. Some of the requirements for ornamentals are slightly different. In fact, some products that can be used on ornamentals can't be used on vegetables or on food crops. So that's what you're using. When you're using it, again, comes down to the same concepts. You need to be scouting. There are some diseases and some issues that we want people to know when they come in, and we want them to be paying attention to make sure that they're there. But sometimes on a disease, you can't wait until you see the effects of it on the plant, because at that point the plant is too damaged and probably needs to be disposed of. So there are a few where they know they're going to come in about this time of year under these environmental conditions. So they're kind of prepped to know, yep, okay, we need to, about now is when this needs to happen, or we know under this temperature and humidity combination, this is likely to happen, and so we'll use it. But we don't want them to just go in and use it regardless. And so, yeah, the same thing of trying to limit the amount that's used, trying to limit the types of pesticides that are used so that they are the appropriate ones and have the least effect on, we want the good effects on what we're trying to control, no effects on something else. So when we're looking at insect management, there's a lot of biological control that's being used in greenhouses. You can still use pesticides and insecticides, but you need to make sure that the ones that you're using to control what you don't want don't also control what you do want. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I think you'd probably agree with that, Heather, that you have to know the biology of this piece and this piece and this piece and how they all fit together. So yes, reducing the amount and and trying to encourage the use of softer pesticides. Exactly, we're doing the same thing.
So I just find this fascinating, hearing from both of our speakers about topics related to agricultural biosecurity and public health. And I want to engage our participants a bit more at this time. And certainly if participants have questions or comments that they want to share, you can put those in the chat box, enter hand if you would like to be recognized. But I have some questions to populate the chat box with, and we're going to do kind of a mini ag chat during our meeting here. And I just want to, stimulate some sharing of thoughts. And our first question, it's in the chat box, is what terms do you use for practices to keep plants, animals, or humans healthy? So what resonated with you? What are you doing in your world that relates to protecting health? And if you could, when you enter a response, put the number of the question that you're responding to next to your response. So for question 1, just put your response 1 and then your answer. So that will help us track those responses when we're going through the chat later. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think on that and enter some thoughts in the chat box. If you thought you were just going to sit back and listen today, well, we've got news for you. We want you to participate. So what resonated with you about practices that are important to you for keeping plants, animals, or humans healthy? Great, so we've got some thoughts coming in. And I think we see echoes of what we heard, right? The importance of isolation, cleaning and disinfection, the all-important sanitation, understanding who is coming in, who might be visiting, who might be driving onto our premises. Also awareness, that's great, right? Awareness of the risks of transmission of disease, right? And awareness of what types of diseases we're looking for. When Betsy was talking about, and Heather as well, thinking about, well, if we have a problem, we need to know exactly what it is so that we can figure out the best way to deal with that problem. Being aware of what the right approach is important, and then being aware of some things that maybe aren't so familiar is important. You know, we didn't have to worry about COVID before this year, and now we do. So we have to know what the signs look like and be on the alert for it. Good, these are great comments coming in. You can keep them coming in, and we're just going to layer in the second question for you. So the second question we have is, in what ways, if any, has what you heard today changed what you think about biosecurity? Have we changed what you think about biosecurity? So earlier we had you type in, what did you think of the term agricultural biosecurity? So now we're kind of asking you to reflect on that and think whether anything you've heard today has changed your thinking. And if you would, make sure before your response you put which question you're responding to. So I just asked question 2. In what ways has what you heard today changed what you think about biosecurity, particularly agricultural biosecurity? Great. If you saw Susan Kerr's comment, she's thinking more about plants and how to keep them healthy, right? And so for those of us in food animal production or any kind of animal production where we have animals that eat, they need feed crops as well that need to be kept healthy. So they're an integrated agricultural system. And Greg says, yeah, it applies to both plant and animal systems. I think sometimes we forget that. So I think today's conversation has been really important in reminding us that both of these systems share similar challenges in terms of protecting the health of what we are growing, whether we're growing it for to make someone's yard look pretty, or it's growing for someone to eat, or growing for an animal to eat. Great, and there's a comment about how multifaceted it is, how complex it is, all the different things that we need to think about. Yeah, and then how do we explain how important this is? So we heard this a couple times, that it can be hard for people to make the best decision, or at least what the science tells us might be the best decision, you know, not just to reach for a bottle of something and spray our plants or inject the animals with a drug, but to stop and think about, is that actually going to do what we want it to and not have any unforeseen, unwanted side effects or consequences?
I think this is kind of the eternal extension question too. How do we get the message across, and how do we get people to buy in? And it's always a people issue when it comes to it.
Well, maybe
Which is
that's
question 3.
Maybe that's the benefit of COVID, in that people now are looking at, you know, why do you wash your hands and how do you wash your hands? And just in terms of thinking about, you know, the system as a whole, and that, you know, we're all, because I always think, oh, we're going to go talk about sanitation again. And you can hear growers, you know, kind of rolling their eyes and like, oh, we've heard this, and they've heard it. But sometimes it's like, okay, let's think about this differently so that you can really see the impact. Because if you don't do those baseline practices, the higher level ones, the pesticides and so forth, you're fighting a harder battle. So there is that baseline too. So maybe it's an advantage. Maybe there's a small advantage of COVID.
If we've got a question coming in, but I'm just going to ask Joanna to go ahead and enter the next couple questions, because that is relevant to what we're talking about right now. So one of the questions that we would like everyone to reflect on is, what challenges do you and your peers face in getting others to adopt practices, right? The best practices to support plant and animal health. And then question 4 is, what challenges do you feel are common among those of us from plant and animal systems? So where did you hear commonalities today? And then I'm going to skip one of our questions, and the last question that I'm going to ask for your input on today is related to, in what ways do you share your experiences? So those things that you get your communication person to do, or you know someone who's really good at explaining the situation or has a story to share that's just the right thing that gets producers to understand what it is that you're trying to convey. How do you share those with others? Are you able to share those stories with others? Are you able to share your success stories at getting someone to adopt a practice? Are you able to share the times when things didn't go right? Are you able to share the lessons learned when things didn't go right? How are you sharing those now with others? How are you sharing success stories and lessons learned? So you have the opportunity to scroll through the chat, identify which questions you want to respond to, and just put that question number in front of your response. And I'm going to have Joanna bring up now our a homepage of our forum. So today we're in the meeting side of the community conversation, but we also have a forum. So it's an asynchronous place for us to continue sharing among each other. And we want to think about how could the forum be used to share those success stories and to share lessons learned, not just among the people that we already know, but among others, to expand our, as I call it, our biosecurity community across the animal and plant health spectrum. We will show you a couple things in the forum, and I just want to let you know that what we've been asking in the chat, we will summarize. So without your name, we'll summarize some of that feedback, some of the input, and enter that right into a forum on this site. So we're going to just give you a little quick tour. I don't know how many of you have participated in an online forum before, or maybe already are part of a subgroup in Connect Extension. This community has a subgroup on Connect Extension. That's where you are seeing this biosecurity community. What I really like about this kind of forum, as opposed to a listserv where you're getting messages in your email, is that in the forum, everything stays organized. It stays with the topic that people were conversing about, and it doesn't get lost the way that messages can get lost in your inbox or in a folder through a listserv. The other thing that's really important to recognize if you choose to join is that this forum belongs to everyone who is a member. It is not about me or Deb or Joanna directing where this forum goes. We want the members to come up with new forums. You know, maybe there are topics that you want to discuss. So this is the place where you can do that. You can create and respond to topics here. So all you have to do to join, if you don't already have a Connect extension login, is to request one. And once you have that, you can log in and find this subgroup or any other subgroup. There's lots of subgroups. We do want you to know that observing this biosecurity community of practice is part of a research project being led by Danielle Farley and her supervisor Joel Iverson at the University of Montana. By studying the content shared within the community, Danielle's objective is to understand how people communicate about biosecurity. Because of the link between our forums and this research project, there is an informed consent section of the group space that we encourage you to review. Your consent to participate in the research is implied by your participation, which you can end at any time. Once you join, it's also important to realize that you have control over notifications that you receive from Connect Extension, so you can consult some of the resources about how to set those the way that you want them. We are almost at the end of our time today, and I want to thank you again for joining us, and please join me in thanking our featured speakers today. Both Betsy and Heather did a fabulous job in helping us think across boundaries in terms of what we do to protect plant and animal health, including human health. This fall, we are anticipating a series of, planning a series of web meetings on youth biosecurity education. Those meetings will be designed to stimulate conversations related to helping youth understand and implement biosecurity to keep agricultural animals healthy. And I want to draw your attention to the link to a survey. It's a Google form that we would like you to click on and provide your thoughts on what you heard today and how we might move forward with this biosecurity community. Feedback is a gift, and we certainly appreciate yours. So I want to thank you again for joining this Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture community conversation. While the focus of our project is biosecurity in agriculture, I hope you are still doing all you can to stay safe during the COVID-19 epidemic. So until next time, be well and biosecure.